All right, in this video, we're going to talk about 3 big mistakes that podcasters make. My name is Pat Flynn. I've been podcasting ever since 2010, and I've helped thousands of people start their podcast. I have the #1 YouTube video about starting a podcast, and I'd love to help you too. And one of the best things to do to best help ourselves is to understand the mistakes that other people have made before. I'm going to be talking about some of the mistakes that I've made, some of the ones that I've seen my students have made and that I've noticed out there in the podcasting space. And as podcasting continues to grow like mad right now, which is really great, it is still the early days of podcasting. When you really think about it and you look at the numbers, I mean, there are over 500 million, active blogs. There are about 30 to 40 to 50 million active YouTube channels. The last time I heard was from a study a couple of years ago. So it's probably well over 50 million active YouTube channels right now. We just hit, less than a year ago, 1 million total podcasts. And that's total podcasts, not necessarily active either. So we're still in the early days. And so if you have yet to start a podcast, this is a great thought because we can go, okay, well, when I start a podcast, whether it's soon or later, how might I best avoid the mistakes that people make so that I can get results faster, right? I would encourage you to consider starting one. I do believe it is the #1 way that I've been able to succeed online because I've ran surveys to find that out, but also just in general, in conversations with people. I remember when I was blogging 3 times a week and I already had a YouTube channel. I went to a conference and I was only podcasting 2 times a month at this point, once every other week. And I remember meeting some people who had heard my show and they couldn't stop talking about the stories that I was telling or the points that I was making. Things seemed to stick much better. Stories seem to be more memorable, and when I started to think about it, I was like, you know what? I think I need to double down on this podcasting thing. And even though I was blogging 3 times a week, podcasting once every other week, it was the podcast that stuck. And it still continues to this day remain our #1 platform for reach, our #1 platform for building relationships with people. If you think about the people that you can bring on your show, other people in your industry, other colleagues, other friends, you can't help but build a relationship with people in the space of that time. So more on that, but of course, the big mistakes too. So make sure you don't miss that. Thank you for being here today. If you're here live, say hello to your friends here in the chat. If you're watching the replay, hashtag team replay in the comments section. High five to everybody in the room. Let's get the show started.
This is the income stream to help you achieve your dream. All while we keep it clean. This is the income stream. It's the kind of show where you can come and go, but then you leave inspired with no fee required. The income stream with Pat Flynn.
All right, so I was just about to say, I don't want to talk over the lyrics, but I just wanted to say, I remember now, and I think somebody talked about this yesterday, that I actually have an animated intro to go along with that. And there were some issues with it, and then I broke my computer, the screen cracked, and ever since the screen cracked and then I eventually got it back, I have yet to re-implement that. I'm going to see if I can dig that up and find it for episode 300, which happens tomorrow. 300! That is crazy that we've done this 299 days in a row. And tomorrow, we're definitely going to be bringing the fire. We have a special guest coming, one of our very own. You might not know who it is. It's a person who's been in the room before. In episode 200, we brought Grandma Goody in, and that has been one of the most memorable moments I've ever had online, in fact. And I'm looking forward to a good show tomorrow with our special guest. So anyway, more on that tomorrow. Definitely come at, I believe the start time is going to be 9 a.m. Pacific. So at our usual time, let me just verify that just in case you have to go. But that's going to be 9 a.m. Pacific. Actually, my phone will be a little easier because apparently I'm not logged in. But that will be, yes, 9 a.m. Pacific tomorrow. 9 a.m. Pacific. So anyway, thank you. Martin, thank you so much for that super chat that just came in. Because of you and podcasting, I've achieved so much. Now trade making my show or trademarking your show. I always credit you for my podcast. Have you hit 1 million downloads yet, Martin? I think you were very close, or at least 750,000 the last time I remember you sharing. So anyway, how crazy is that? So thank you. I appreciate you for that. So let's talk more about podcasting. Fun story. 2 days ago, I was interviewed on a podcast, and it was the longest interview that I've ever been a part of. It was one of the most fun conversations I've ever had, and it was not related to online business. It was actually related to Pokemon. So many of you know I have a brand new channel over at Deep Pocket Monster that I'm experimenting with. It's more of a hobby thing, but I'm also taking a lot of what I've learned here in the entrepreneurial space and applying it there, and it's working. We're almost at 1,000 subscribers on that YouTube channel already, and I'm getting invited on other people's shows. I've just been published on Pokemon Radar, and that was a 2-hour conversation. So if you want to hear an interesting conversation about Pokemon and investing and collecting, and you get to hear some stuff that you've never heard from me before on that show, because the host Radar has done an amazing job asking questions, and he's a brand new podcaster as well. So it's kind of cool to see him sort of work on his craft, and we can help each other out. But if you look up Pokemon Radar, you can find that 2-hour interview, in fact, which you can have in the background and such. And it was really fun. One of the most fun conversations I've had. I was recently invited on another show called Pokenomics and another one called Poke Tea Time with Yizzy and Shivam. When you put yourself out there and you provide something different, people want to connect. And in this world now, we are going to have even more podcasts be a part of this, which is cool because podcasters are always looking for great guests. So even if you never end up starting a podcast of your own, which again, I encourage you to potentially at least start looking at it, at least get on other shows, like be a guest on another person's podcast or YouTube channel. The collaboration factor is huge. A lot more value can be exchanged. A lot more ideas can be exchanged. And I think what Pokemon Radar and some of the others are doing in the Pokemon space, stepping up to like bring other people on, not just open packs all day, to get more information, to bring history into it, to bring story, is really, really smart. So having a lot of fun with that, it's really cool, but still finding my way around. I was a little worried that Radar was going to ask me questions I didn't know the answers to. I was feeling a little nervous, and he said he was feeling nervous too because he knew I was a podcaster. So anyway, it was a lot of fun, so you can check that out. But let's talk about these 3 mistakes. We're going to go one by one here, and we're going to unpack each of them, and at the end, we'll probably have some room for Q&A, whether you have a podcast again or not, or even if you do, if you're just starting out, or if you've been doing this for a while. I want to talk about these things because even for veteran podcasters, I've noticed some of these things. That's right. Even for people who've been podcasting for years, they're still making these mistakes, which means if you're just starting out now or you're thinking about starting one, you could actually have an advantage, right? And plus, with the podcast space growing, you can actually do it right from the beginning and have more and better results. And I'll tell you, it's growing fast. There's a lot of money being spent in podcasting. There's a lot of advertisers now flocking to the podcasting space, and where there are known to be advertisers spending money, there is going to be more people showing up simply because they want to make money. And that's actually not one of the first mistakes, wanting to make money from your podcast. I think, in fact, it is a mistake not to want to make money from your podcast. I think it is a mistake to have that be the only reason you want to start a podcast. But I think it's important to want to get paid for that and to want to get supported so you can actually then further support your audience. This is actually not the first mistake, but that is a mistake I see a lot of podcasters going, you know what, I don't want to make any money. But then you could further service your audience if you do, right? So mistake number 1, and this comes from a quote from Seth Godin, and I've sort of rejigged this quote for podcasting. I did this once before with his quote, podcasting is the new blogging. And my quote that stems off of that, if that's true, then guest podcasting is the new guest blogging. But here's another version of me sort of podcastifying a quote from Seth Godin. The Seth Godin quote is this, and this should stick because it really hits when you really understand it. Don't find customers for your products. Find products for your customers. And this speaks wholly to me, especially as somebody who's written a book about validating your product ideas. If you've read Will It Fly, it's all about understanding who it is that you're serving first and then building a product for them, versus what a lot of people do, which is they build a product and then they kind of scream from the rooftops trying to find customers. So let me say that one more time. Cool? Don't find customers for your products. Find products for your customers. Now, they're not a customer yet, but they're going to be. And if you have that approach and you know that you're there to serve them, then great. So what is this quote in the podcasting space? Well, don't find an audience for your podcast. Create a podcast for your audience. And that's the first mistake. People creating the podcast and hoping that if they build it, they will come. The more that you get to know about who it is that you're speaking to, the more that you can understand your avatar, your target market, what have you, the better. And this word avatar is really interesting, right? Yes, it was a very expensive movie. I think Avatar 2 is coming out. It's one of the most incredible rides at Disney World. But Avatar is also an exercise that we as entrepreneurs have where we can just begin to start to paint a picture of who it is that's listening or who it is that our customer is going to be, right? And oftentimes we're told to make up that perfect customer. They are 35 years old. They have 2 kids, they travel to work 6 days a week. They got to go in an extra day because they got to get that TPS report done. And they're at home and they're not spending a lot of time with their kids. So they're dreaming in the back of their head that they want to start a business. And, they have a 2-car garage in the suburbs. And, you're making up this story, right? And that's great. It's good to understand. And I hope he gets his TPS report done. But unfortunately, this is just a made-up person. And yes, they're our ideal customer, or in this case, for a podcast, our ideal listener. But what if you have a question that you want to ask to verify something? What if you really want to know what they're thinking? You can't ask Fred, who has 2.2 kids, what they're thinking. So why not instead actually start talking to people and getting involved in that community and talking to them, right? Yes, the TPS report. If you know what movie that's from, bonus points. Show me in the chat that you know what I'm talking about, right? So if you build it, they will come. No. If you build it, if you've done it right, then you would have already spoken to those who are waiting for it, if that makes sense. If you build it, that's not the first step. So let's do a lot more thoughts on what we can do to better understand who our audience is. Again, remember that Seth Godin quote, don't find customers for your products, find products for your customers. Well, don't find an audience for your podcast. Build a podcast for your audience. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to have an audience already, but when you have this understanding of who it is that you're serving, then that's who it is that you're creating a podcast for. That's who you're speaking to. That's who you're talking to. That's the language. You're going to keep it the same that they can understand. Any guest that you have on the show is going to be relevant to them in that case. You're going to have a clear understanding of what their goals are. You're going to have a clear understanding of what content to create to then support them on those goals. And the more that you know what your audience wants, the better. Zig Ziglar once said that nobody's ever gotten poor by helping others get what they want. So let's do that in the podcast space. You just happen to be doing it with your voice. Help your listeners get what they want. Your podcast as a byproduct will grow. Right? Office Space. Love it. Thank you. So we don't want to jump to conclusions like Kathy says. We want to better know who our audience is. So there's a few exercises that I can have and share with you, especially if you're just starting out, that can help you understand sort of where your position might be in this space that you're getting into and where you might be able to find out what people are asking about and where some of those answers might exist and where you can start to sort of become expert curator. If you don't feel like an expert, that's okay. You can still succeed. I built a very successful business helping people learn how to become a security guard. Am I a security guard? No. But I stepped up and played expert curator. And oftentimes as podcasters, that's what we're doing. We don't necessarily know everything, but we can curate the guests. We can curate that information by doing research. We can curate the case studies that exist out there and put them on our show and talk about them and explore them with our audience. I built a successful business helping people start a food truck, foodtrucker.com. Both of those businesses recently sold exactly a year ago, in fact, which was really cool because now they're off my plate. I can focus more on other things. But do I have a food truck? No, but I played expert curator. In that case, with the food truck business, by having conversations, I understood that audience was not going to read very many blog posts. Yes, they were looking for information, and of course, we then supported them with information they were looking for. We knew that they were looking for, how do I get a food truck? How do I build a business plan for my food truck? So we created content that specifically spoke to that. But when it came to, in general, just sharing more information, we took advantage of podcasts. So Food Trucker had a podcast that I created called Food Trucker School. That was also sold with the business. And Food Trucker School is a very popular show in the food truck space. It only had 900 downloads per episode, but that's 900 food truck owners listening while prepping their food every single day because, again, they can't read. How did I know this? I went to food truck events when I was ordering, simply asked a question. Hey, if somebody were to create the best information about how to run your food truck that can help you make more sales, how would you best like to receive that information? They all said, well, either a YouTube video that I can put in the background or a podcast, right? So I just asked. And how many times are we using the internet to hide? I mean, I wanted to when I first started. I was like, ooh, great. I don't actually have to talk to anybody. I can create a business and just be kind of holed up at home and not wear pants. Like, cool. Nobody has to know any of that. I can just show up online. But truth is, I once heard that the best way to grow your online business is to get offline. And by offline, I mean just not getting into content creation mode all the time, by getting into relationship building mode and all those sorts of things, right? Which takes us to our second mistake. But I do want to talk about these exercises first, all right? So yes, food truck owners can't read. They can't read. And by can't read, they of course don't have the time to read, but they have the time to listen, right? So the one exercise I want to share with you to understand more about your target audience is actually an exercise plus a tool. The exercise is what I like to call your market map exercise. So you create a spreadsheet. You have 3 columns. The first column on the left-hand side is going to be a list of all the places where that target audience exists, right? Where are they hanging out? What other websites do they go to? What podcasts are they listening to? What video channels are supporting them? All that kind of stuff. Conferences, online, offline, events, virtual summits, etc. Like just list them all out there. At least now you'll know where to go find these people who eventually you want to have listen to your show or buy your products or whatever. The middle column you want to have be the people. These may overlap with some of the people who own those properties of those places, but when you start to make a list of all the people, you start to get to have people understand, or you get to understand who has already spent the time to earn the trust with that audience, right? And that's really important because now you can develop partnerships with them. You can see what they're doing that's working, and you can do more of that and do more of what's not, or do less of what's not, excuse me. And then the column on your right-hand side, the third one, is going to be a list of all the products, all the prices that go along with those products. That just gives you an understanding of what people are paying for, right? That's really important because that you get to actually have a sense of the emotion of what people actually want and where they want to end up. Oftentimes, it's not what they buy, it's why they buy. That's really important to understand. So when you get this market map, you get to begin to realize, and this is your advantage coming in later into a space, that niche market has already been tapped into. And that's a good thing because you can start to see what's working, what's not. If you're doing a physical product, for example, and you find these products on Amazon, look at the 3-star reviews. You get to see what people like about something and what people don't like about something. Do more of what people like and do less of what people don't. And again, just having this understanding is going to give you a better understanding so that when you create your podcast, you can create a podcast for your audience and you're not trying to find an audience for your podcast. The beauty of this is when you nail that niche, people who are listeners of your show, if they know that you are their go-to person, these people hang out with each other. They're in these places. And once they find you, they're going to share you. And if you're not being shared, you're not being found. I forgot who said that, but I like that. Because then that forces you to create something shareable, something worthwhile. And if it's not worthwhile to share, then why is it worthwhile to create? Boom. Gerardo, this is the guy. What's up, Gerardo? Good to see you here, my friend. Thanks for coming in. I appreciate you. I've been getting to know Gerardo in some of the late night Pokemon streams that have been happening. I appreciate it. Relationship building is what I'm all about. Inspirational by Marie. Indeed. Absolutely. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate you. Not what they buy, but why they buy. Indeed. So if you make a list of all the products that and courses and coaching programs and such that people buy, that's good to know. You get an understanding of the price point. You get an understanding of sort of, who they're following and whatnot. But when you can really unpack the reason why they buy those things, nobody wants to buy an online course. Nobody wants to buy a tool. Everybody wants the results of what those things give them, right? So let's focus on that, and that'll help engage your audience a little bit more when you start talking to them on your show. Cool. Esther says, love. What was number 2? I had to step away for a bit. Well, I'm about to tell you right now because I didn't even tell anybody yet. So number 2, let me zoom in for this one. Number 2 is you create too much and you're not promoting enough. This is a huge mistake. I was at an event once where Derek Halpern was on stage and he was just talking about content creation in general. We were at FinCon in 2013. This was the same event where I keynoted. I opened the event by falling flat on my face on stage on purpose. And the reason I did that was because the topic was you never get a second chance to make a first impression. So I wanted my first impression to be just like wildly ridiculous and memorable because I wanted this story to stick and to demonstrate that, well, okay, nobody's ever going to get that. And I literally practiced how to fall. I was watching WWE how-tos and such, and I was practicing on my carpet. And unfortunately, when I did the pretend fall on stage, I didn't account for the fact that the stage was wood and I actually bruised my rib. I was out of breath for about a minute. And I remember somebody coming up to me after and saying, Pat, after you fell, that was like the most dramatic moment. And it was the longest minute I've ever seen. I love how you held out and just didn't say anything for a minute. It really made an impact. And I was like, yeah, I couldn't breathe, but I guess it worked out in my favor. Okay. So Derek on stage had asked the audience, mostly of bloggers, some podcasters, how many of you spend more of your time creating than promoting? 98% of the crowd put their hands up. How many of you spend equal amounts of time creating and promoting? The other 2% raised their hands. How many of you spend more time promoting than creating? Nobody raised their hand. Everybody was creating. And Derek's thesis and and I'm in agreement with this, is that we need to be promoting more. We need to be developing more relationships to promote more. We need to be conscious of the fact that when we just create alone, we are wasting our time. Not because our creations aren't great or worthwhile, but it's because it won't be worthwhile if people don't discover these things that we're creating. You could have the best content in the world. If nobody finds it, is it actually the best content in the world? Well, nobody will know, right? So let's talk about podcast promotion. Podcast promotion is so important because it, more than blogging, does take a lot of time. It does take a lot of effort, especially when you consider having a guest on the show and all this kind of stuff. There's a lot of coordination. It's a lot. It's absolutely a lot. And unfortunately, although a struggle to create, sometimes when we create the show and we're done, we're already moving on to the next one, right? And you should be having a plan for what is coming next so you never get into that content hamster wheel. But it would behoove you to absolutely start thinking about, how am I going to get this episode in front of others? A lot of people gravitate towards social media. Oh, social media is going to be the place where I'm going to promote my show. Cool. Well, the problem with that is that everybody who follows you on social media is already following you. They already know you exist. The big question is, how can we get in front of newer audiences to grow our show? Where should we be spending time to promote? If you were to ask me, Pat, what percentage of creation and promotion should you have? Honestly, I think it should be split 50-50. I think it should be split 50-50. What's up, XO Edits? Good to see you. So people are thinking who the guest might be. I'm pretty sure nobody's going to guess who our special guest is tomorrow. If you do, I'm going to give you props, but I'm not going to give you any more clues. Scrap Happy says, definitely don't promote enough. I've been making great episodes, but not getting out there. I was wondering the promotion part also, how do we go about promoting? With limited time, how would you recommend producing 3 episodes per month and shift save time to promotion? Truthfully, if you are not having the time to promote, I would create less so that you can promote more. Just in general. Now, obviously, you can become more efficient with your creation such that you can then open up more time. But ideally, and this is really hard to do, especially if you've been in creation mode all the time, I wouldn't just rip off half of your content creation time to do the other half, promotion. I would slowly lead into it because it does feel like especially if you've been sort of having a good momentum with the consistency of your show, it's going to be difficult to do that. So I would say let's find the big hitters, the big levers that we can pull to start promoting. So let's talk about podcast promotion right now. I had said earlier in the show when I was talking about Seth Godin that he had also recently said that podcasting is the new blogging. And I say that guest podcasting is the new guest blogging. I highly recommend, even if you don't have a podcast, you should be trying to get yourself on another show ASAP, right? You should be focusing on getting on other people's podcasts. Why? Well, think about it. You are, number one, going to be in front of a completely new audience. There might be some overlap, and in fact, there should be, because you're likely going to be starting with people who you already have some sort of relationship with or who cross over a little bit. Well, now you can get the whole audiences to know that both of y'all's side exists. So as far as guest podcasting is concerned, even if you don't have a podcast, I would still highly recommend doing it. Because like I said, you're in front of a completely brand new audience. But more than that, you have the endorsement from the host that people have already earned their trust with. That host has spent perhaps months, years, working on building these relationships. And you can just swoop in a good way, and provide value to that audience, and perhaps have a lot of people come and then listen to your show. That's huge. When we really think about this, I want you to imagine the friction involved. Something I talk about a lot in online business is this idea of friction, right? And so a strategy that I learned when creating any product, or especially a physical product, is how can I reduce the friction, meaning the work it might take to do something, hence the switch pod, right? The switch pod was created to reduce the friction for a vlogger to travel with a tripod, to hold out in vlogger mode and put back down and put on their table. We reduce the friction. You think about any convenient product out there, it reduces the friction. So with a podcast and you being a guest on another person's show, it's so much easier to go and then land on your podcast versus imagine a person seeing you on social media. Maybe somebody does retweet it, or a guest that you had does mention that they were on your podcast. Cool, that happens sometimes. It's not going to be a huge amount of numbers, but it does. A person has to first of all, conscious that that particular post exists that then promotes the podcast. They have to be interrupted from what it is that they've been doing. They then have to click on that. And where are they clicking to? Are they clicking to a web page? Are they clicking to specifically Apple? Are they specifically clicking to Spotify? There's a lot of choices. Who knows? Preferably some sort of link tree or a page that then shares, hey, you can follow this here in whichever preferred podcast player you have. Then a person has to click play. Then a person has to listen. Then a person has to think about it. They have to get to know you. Hopefully you have a good hook at the beginning of that episode. There's a lot of friction. And friction is good because it can heat things up. But the truth is you're going to have an ice cold podcast if you in fact have this approach of just, okay, social media is going to be the way and I'm going to grow. It's not. I'm just telling you right now. But when you are on another person's podcast, this host who's already earned the trust with this audience will say, hey, you got to follow Bill. You can just find his podcast here. Guess what app is already open for them? The podcast app. The podcast app is already open. And so they can easily find you. They've already gotten to know you a little bit. They can just easily click on and subscribe to your show. And here's the other thing. You might think, oh, well, they're already subscribed to that show. Why would they subscribe to this show? Because podcast listeners are crazy. Chat, if you are here live with me right now and you listen to podcasts, please drop in the number of podcasts that you are currently subscribed to. Just give me an estimate. But I want to prove a point here. I want to show you that it's okay because you're not going to be competing with other podcasters. You just have to complement or create a reason for a person to then subscribe, because people on average are subscribed to 7 different shows. Cooking with Kibby says, the hook brings you back. Pat Flynn ain't telling you no lie. Ain't telling you no lie. I'm not telling you no lie. Does that mean I'm lying? I don't know. I'm confused. Scrap Happy 15, Rob 15, Ryan 7, Travis 6. Me and the Quest with so far a record 25 podcasts that he's subscribed to. 25 plus. So there you go. You don't have to worry about competing with other podcasters. Just create something worthy of a person going, ooh, I like this person, let me subscribe. And the trouble is, just creating your show doesn't mean people are going to find it. But by you getting on another show, you're getting an endorsement, you're getting people who already have an app open, and they're good to go. Now I'm going to talk about another promotional strategy that's worked really well, and I've talked about this before, but it's something that Mike Butkus says 40, but I come back to 10 to 12 weekly. Yeah, exactly. Guest, Roberto Blake. It is not Roberto Blake. Oh, it's a Blues Traveler song. Cool. Thank you. So the other thing to understand is that this is a mistake that goes with 2. It's like 2A or 2B or what have you. This is within the realm of you're creating too much, you're not doing enough marketing. Is part of marketing is not just, okay, well, what do we do after the show? So far we've talked about sort of things that happen before the show comes out, right? Who it is, episodes that you're coming out on, which podcasters are you going to be a guest on? But also the guests who come on your show are important to think about when it comes to promotion. And then just let me tell you this straight up. Just because you have the biggest guest on your show does not mean you're going to get a lot of new people to come find you. It does not. I heard that Lewis Howes had Kevin Hart on his show, and it did nothing for the growth of his podcast. It was a great episode. His current subscribers absolutely loved it. But I want you to think and put yourselves in the heads of somebody who is perhaps an A-lister or a celebrity or an influencer or a leader in your space. If they share it, that's a bonus. Likely it's not going to happen. Yes, you will get some clout having the time to interview, right? Whether it's an amazing poet or an amazing artist or an amazing leader in your space, or maybe you're a DJ and you find out that you can have an interview with Funkmaster Flex. It doesn't matter. That celebrity name will bring you clout, but it's not going to necessarily grow your show, right? In fact, a lot of the episodes on my podcast that have grown the show the most are the ones where the guest either is an up-and-comer, because they're going to be more likely to want to provide value back. They're going to be more likely to do a lot more work to promote it directly to their audience versus an A-lister who might have other people who do it for them, or just might not even do it at all, or don't even have the time because they're actually saying yes to your podcast because they have a book coming out, but they're also on 25 other podcasts at the same time. And if they said yes to sharing one, they're going to have to say yes to all of them, right? Rob Maurer, nope. Rob is great, by the way, though. So don't think that you have to have the best and craziest celebrities on your show who have the highest reach, because their reach really doesn't matter. What matters is, does your show affect the people who are listening? And like I said earlier, when it does, people who often flock together will share that show with each other. There was an episode that I did of my podcast, episode 96. Episode 96 was about artists and how artists can create and make money online. Artists like painters, sculptors, like those kinds of artists. And it wasn't just about creating and putting things on Etsy. It was actually a little deeper than that. And when I had this idea to create this show, I thought it was going to bomb. I thought it would be interesting. It was sort of experimental, but it was so niche. My audience are entrepreneurs, and most of them, 99% of them, are not considered professional artists who would benefit from this content. So why in the world would I create it for them? Well, I created it because I knew that there were people out there who would want this information, but they weren't listening or subscribed to my show yet. And so what happened is I created this episode. I brought a guest on. His name was Corey Huff, who knew about this topic. So I'm not the subject matter expert. This person was. I interviewed him. I asked questions. I posted this out there. Two really interesting things happened. Number one, people in my audience still got a lot of value from it, because although they weren't selling paintings or sculptures, there were a lot of crossover things that they could still learn from. Secondly, people who were in my audience who were not artists but new artists completely shared that show with them. And number three, bonus, when artists got a hold of this, they then shared it and it went viral. It went viral in artist communities. I saw my artwork for the show being posted up on forums and on Reddit and on a whole bunch of other places because it was the most useful information about this topic that they'd ever heard anywhere else. And the cool thing was, I'm not that subject matter expert. I just brought the right guest in, I made it niche specific, and it went viral in that space. Derek Halpern did the same thing with a blog post that was specifically about people who were owners of spas. Most of his audience are not owners of spas. They benefited from learning how owners of spas could do something, but then owners of spas started to push this out there into the owners of spa world, and they all started to come to Derek and wanted to go dig deep and wanted coaching from him and all this kind of stuff, right? So we're talking about promotion here. And I want you to think about, to my final point on promotion, well, if a celebrity, for example, is a little bit too busy to promote your show and push it out there for you, well, who might be a good fit? And one of the strategies I teach in my course, and one that I teach my students, is this idea of interviewing people who have audiences, but not podcasts. Because when you offer your podcast as a platform for them to be heard finally, they're going to be very likely to share it with their groups of people who know they exist already. Case in point, you could potentially look on Facebook to find a group related to your topic. Look at the groups, You don't even have to join the groups. You can find in the members section who the admins and or the moderators are of that group. And then you can interview them or ask them to sort of answer a question, and then have that question be featured on a podcast. The chances that they will, number one, say yes is very high. They obviously have a community and they own a group, and this topic is important to them. Any which way that they can help spread the word of what it is that they do and why they created what they created, the better. But number two, the chances are that they're going to share it are very high as well. Because what did you do? You just made them look like a hero, right? You just made them look like a hero. Samson, nope, it is not. So you can take your podcast and give it to others who will then benefit from having them on a show like yours. And so imagine a Facebook group going in there and promoting your own podcast yourself. It's not going to be looked, it's not going to look very good. And it might lead to getting banned or just getting shunned, which we don't want to happen. But when you go in, you provide a space for that moderator or admin to come and talk about the thing that they love, and also mention the community. Chances are they're going to share it in the community. And now your show is getting endorsed by somebody who's already earned trust with a whole bunch of people. And some of these groups on Facebook have thousands of people. It's not Lex, Samson. Do a lot with little. Chikna, yes. Do a lot with little. 80-20, Pareto's rule, indeed. How y'all doing, by the way? Are we good? We're about to move into our third big mistake that podcasters make. We talked about number one, the idea that you don't want to find an audience for your podcast. You want to build a podcast for your audience, meaning you got to get to know who it is that you're talking to, what they might need help with. The tool that I didn't mention earlier was answerthepublic.com, where you can literally see what questions people are typing into Google. And then you can use that as validation for these are topics that are actually important to my people. You should have conversations. You should be getting into clubhouses and into group conversations online, into Facebook groups to just learn more about who it is that you're speaking to. Number two, you're creating too much and you're not promoting enough. And I offered 3 some odd number of different ways that you could promote that are a little bit different, that work, that do pull the bigger levers for you. We are chatting. We are good. I guess number 3 is charging money too soon. No, Bill. That's a good guess. But I think you could never be too soon to charge if you know what can help people. Imagine that you have a solution, but it costs some time for you. So it is something that you'd want to charge for. Are you going to say to somebody who's found you for the first week, very, very early on in your show, and say, you know what, it's only been a week. I know I have a solution for you, though. I want to sell it to you, but you know what? I'm going to wait till the podcast gets to 2 months. No, that doesn't make sense. So timing-wise, it's not about I've had this many episodes or I've been podcasting for this long, is how much have you understood that this thing that you are charging for, or this thing that you're promoting that's even not yours, aka affiliate marketing, or this program that you're putting on, how much do you know that that's going to help your audience? And again, it stems to just reverse engineering the pains, problems, wants, needs, desires that your audience has, and then creating the content and or promoting the things that matter to them with that. Cooking with Kibby. What did Cooking with Kibby say? Not giving up. Cool. Thumbs downs, a couple of them came in. Hope you have a better day. Thanks for stopping by, though. It still helps with the algorithm, so I appreciate you so much. Let's talk about mistake number 3. And this is going to sound kind of odd because it actually is counterintuitive. Mistake number 3 for a podcast is this: being too consistent. Being too consistent? I don't mean consistency in terms of, okay, I'm going to have an episode once a week. You should definitely be consistent in the frequency and the cadence and rhythm of your show, for sure. But what I mean by consistent is consistently having the same type of stuff on your show. The beauty of a podcast is that it's yours. You can do whatever you want with it. Be smart, though. You don't want to copy anybody. You don't want to use not royalty-free music. So no, technically you can't do whatever you want, but in most cases you can. It's your show. But we sometimes fall into this rhythm with our podcasts, especially having done it for so many years. You kind of just go into the motions. And let me know if you're in that position where you kind of just are in this rhythm now. And yes, you're always trying to improve, but you're not really considering that this is something that you can actually play around with a little bit and experiment with. And this is what I would encourage you to do. Use your podcast platform to try different things, to experiment. And sometimes when things are consistent, they become regular. They become expected. They become usual. I want you to imagine you go to bed with your you go to bed with your spouse every night and you just say, I love you, good night. I love you, good night, every single night. Good night, honey, I love you. Good night, honey, I love you. Good night, honey, I love you. And it doesn't mean it means less over time, but it's not as, it doesn't have that spark anymore, or it doesn't have that excitement to go behind it anymore because it's expected. It's predictable, as Grandma Goody says here. And so imagine instead at 3:48 p.m. next Tuesday, you go into her office with a box of chocolates and you just say, I love you, honey. What's this for? No reason. That's what gets remembered. That's what gets talked about. The pattern interrupt. And I love using the podcast to interrupt the pattern every once in a while. Maybe this is something that you do publicly. You consciously tell people, hey, in the next 2 episodes, you're going to hear something different. I'm actually going to be walking around the streets of New York with our special guest. And I'm going to have the microphone on. You're going to hear the horns and the hustle and bustle of New York in the background and the freezing cold weather. We're going to talk about money by walking through some of the most expensive stores in New York. So make sure you stick around and listen to that. Doesn't that sound interesting and different? Well, guess what? I did that episode. I actually was in New York for a sort of publicity situation for, that sounds bad, right? It was a publicity situation. No, it was good. We were invited to New York to talk to the news and stuff about SwitchPod and to talk to different creators and such. And that's actually when we met MKBHD, who lives out in Jersey. It was super fun. But I totally just lost my train of thought when it came to this story about New York and pattern interrupts. My bad. I got sidetracked. This interview with Ramit. So Ramit, living in New York at the time, I asked him, "Hey, can I interview you?" He's like, "Yeah. You want to go to a WeWork or an office or something?" No, I want to try something different. I want to walk around the streets of New York with you as we talk about the psychology of money. And I walked around with him in the freezing cold, by the way, in the middle of New York. And it was some of the most intriguing, engaging content that I've ever heard anybody talk about when they've commented on the show. Something different. Do I do that every episode? No. But people were like, wow, this sounds like NPR, or wow, I feel like I'm in New York with you. This is so refreshing, right? And even though people who are fans of my show, this is the lesson here. People who were fans of my show still use the words, wow, this was refreshing. What does that insinuate? What does that infer? It infers that things were getting stale for a little bit. The soda was going flat. And it doesn't mean that they are not still going to take a sip of that soda, but there's something to be said for cracking open that Coca-Cola bottle and getting that first sip of something brand new. And it doesn't mean, again, that that's the new direction all the time. But again, it's your show. You could do whatever you want with it. One of my favorite ways to grow your show is to get people to notice it again. And sometimes, again, when we get too consistent or too predictable or too sort of robotic, it can be like how we responded to ads on YouTube channels. How do we respond to ads on YouTube channels now? It's just a thing we're used to. Skip ad and go, right? Skip ad and go. So I want you to just be open with your podcast to the idea of just trying something new, experimenting, have a different kind of guest on. Maybe it's that. Record your podcast in a different way. Talk about a topic that maybe is a little bit controversial, which perhaps you've never done before. Be creative. I think we all have the ability to do that. Just add Mentos to it. Yes. It actually has to be Diet Coke and Mentos, I believe, right? Love this idea of recording on location as a way to mix it up, and of course, pattern interrupts in general. Yes, indeed, pattern interrupts are general. I guess mistake number 4, which is, for me, it's almost ingrained now to focus on this, which is why I didn't write it here, but I'm going to mention this one too. But that's like, get to the hook early in your podcast episode. And this speaks to all of you who are creating content of any kind, right? The first paragraph of your blog post should absolutely speak to why in the heck people should stick around to the end. In your YouTube videos, the first literally 20 seconds, I should at least as a new viewer know what I'm going to get out of this and be intrigued enough to stay till the end. Hi, it's Mr. Beast here. In this video, I'm going to give random people my credit card and see what they can buy. Now, how can you not stick around to watch that? Now, I'm not saying you have to give people your credit card, but Mr. Beast is growing for a reason. And it's not just because he's doing these ridiculous challenges that involve a lot of money, but he is a smart person. I met him in person. He did a performance or a stage presentation at Vid Summit, which is actually where, reminds me of Benji here, who's one of the co-authors of YouTube Secrets, by the way, which you all should check out. Thank you, Benji, for the very generous super chat, my friend. You all should follow Benji. Video influencers, he and his partner, Sean Cannell. Sean has been here before. Good friends of mine. Benji's a wonderful wealth of knowledge, and thank you for that. And no, Benji's not the special guest tomorrow. Benji says, are PR services to help you promote your podcast or help you collab with other podcasts worth money? So there's plenty of services out there. So PR can be put into different kinds of buckets, right? So let me first talk about perhaps what it is that you're speaking of, which is there are companies out there who you can put your podcast sort of in their system and they will help find guests for you, right? Or other people to collaborate with. There is one on every street corner now, it seems. Many are great. I'm very experienced with the team at Interview Valet, and there's a few others. I haven't ever used these services because as a podcaster, when I receive a message on behalf of another podcast, like from one of these services, or even an assistant, I'm already leaning towards saying no. And I'm like, if you want to be on my podcast or you want to collaborate with me, why aren't you the one reaching out, right? And Benji, you with your clout especially and your connections with Sean and the size of your network, I mean, your network is your net worth. And you have this wealth of relationships that you probably don't need these services for this purpose. I'm guaranteeing you that with just a little bit of reach out or connection to somebody who knows somebody who you want to reach out to collaborate with, that this could be done way easier if you or Sean or somebody on your team did this for you, or you did it yourself versus if somebody did it for you, if that makes sense, right? Now, PR is also the idea of having somebody on your behalf reach out to media outlets, not necessarily for collaborations, but potentially to get on the news. I work with BrittanyLLynn.com. Brittany is my PR person. We're on pause right now at the beginning of the year, but I worked with her for 4 or 5 months last year, and she got me on almost a dozen different news stations all across the world. Some Forbes entrepreneur articles, Fast Company, and a few other things. Often that can be, they are often worth their weight in gold if you get the right person who can put you in front of the right people. Now, I will say, I did not see any spikes of any kind whatsoever being on a news station for 2 minutes in Washington or being on a Florida news station for a 1-minute soundbite. That did nothing for me in terms of providing traffic. But what it did do is I now have a little bit of clout as a result of that. I have these news segments that I can now use on sales pages in my YouTube videos to show that I'm not just like a random person talking about podcasting or helping people start an online business. Here is proof that I am somebody worth paying attention to. Bam, insert clip, or bam, show screenshot of Forbes article. And now many of the doubts, not all of them, but many of the doubts people had before potentially investing in something I have to offer or whatnot is gone because that social proof is there, right? Not Nick Sampson. Dude, you're not going to guess by the end of this. Not Peter McKinnon, no. So Benji, I hope that answers your question. Good point. Best collabs start with relationships directly. Thanks for the time to answer. You're welcome. Thank you. And you all should follow Benji and download YouTube Secrets. It is a great book. I don't know, did you and or Sean read that book? Is it on Audible? I'm curious. All right. So we got about 8 more minutes left. I'd love to answer more questions that you might have about podcasting. I saw a few come in, but you're more than welcome to ask that question. Again, just please don't spam. And of course, I'm not able to answer every single question, but I hope you're all having an amazing 2021. We are now in the second week, if you will. And I'm just really excited. I'm pumped. I'm fired up for a lot of the plans that we have. And a lot of it does revolve around podcasts. And I'm really trying not to reveal some of the stuff that we're doing. Although I will say, big fun thing happened. 2 announcements really quick before I get to questions. We did. Cool. So both Benji and Sean read YouTube Secrets. I love books that are read by the authors. So that's fantastic. If you happen to have a chance to hit the like button, that'd be really amazing. Thank you. And 2 announcements really quick. Number one of my companies, Fusebox.fm, which you might remember was once called the Smart Podcast Player. It's a podcast player that you can put on your website that enables your listeners who are on your website to have a much better experience, to go deeper into your show, to be more likely to subscribe. You can even put an email subscribe button right on the player itself. And a lot of the controls that you might find on a mobile device player are now on your website, thanks to Fusebox.fm. There's also some free tools that you can get access to right now, like the transcript plugin, which is SEO friendly, and all that kind of stuff. This podcast player, for 7 years, was WordPress only. It was a WordPress plugin. Today, we just launched the SaaS version of that product. The fact of the matter is now that it can be used on any platform. It's not just specific to WordPress anymore. So if you have a Squarespace site or a Wix site or any of that stuff, now it totally works on any of those, which is really, really cool. And I'm really excited about that. A lot of people ask, well, why focus on a player on a website? You know, don't we just want people to subscribe to Apple? Well, yeah, and Spotify and all those other places. Fusebox.fm is the place to go. But the fact of the matter is a lot of people are finding our podcast for the first time on our websites. They're not necessarily finding it through the search engines on Apple or through the rankings. They're finding it actually on the internet or through a link from another person that links back to your website, or just they're on your website already. And if that experience is not super great, then you might lose out on the opportunity to get a subscriber. So check out Fusebox.fm. We just launched it in sort of its full capacity now. It's now available on everything, which is really cool. The second thing is that I'm going to be talking a lot more about podcasting. Obviously, this is with 150 people in the room, and this is a topic that is very hot right now. A lot of people do want to start their podcast this year and want to do it right. So I have a lot more information to share about that. I'm actually going to be doing a free training about that very shortly. If you go to smartpassiveincome.com/, see pattern interrupt, webinar, you'll get access to where you can sign up to get the free training coming in about 2 weeks. And we're going to go deep into some of the launch strategies and a lot of the things that we need to worry about, like equipment and tools and such. So I didn't want to get into those details today because I just wanted to go over some of the mistakes. But if you want to check that out and sign up for that, it's available now to get on the wait list. There's only 1,000 spots available. So make sure if you do sign up for that to come in early, because our webinar software only holds up to 1,000 people. But that's going to be next week, I think, or 2 weeks from now, January 19th, I think. But you'll see all the information at smartpassiveincome.com/webinar. Humiliating football channel. Do you remember me? I do not remember you, unfortunately, but I would love to learn more about you. That's for sure. Cool. Let's answer some of these questions here. Lisa says, is it okay to have the podcast episodes with different lengths? Must it always be 30 minutes or 60 minutes, or is it okay to vary in between? For me, the perfect podcast length is however long it needs to be to do its job. So if you know what this podcast's purpose is, just reverse engineer that. It should be within a range. But I mean, imagine doing a podcast interview and you're like, oh, all my episodes are 30 minutes. And you're about to get to the great stuff. You're like, oh, sorry, we can't get to that. We are only 30 minutes long. And so, you have to come back next time. That's kind of a poor experience on both sides. I think that if you have a range like 30 to 60 minutes, a 30-minute range would work. If it's flip-flopping, like one episode's 5 minutes and the next one's 4 hours and the next one's 3 minutes and the next one's 2 hours, like that's kind of a wide sort of variable. But I think that within like a 30-minute range, 20 to 30-minute range is fine. And if you can just kind of make sure that you get everything done that you need to do in the episode, well, then it's as long as it needs to be. Mr. Sir says, or Meister Sir says, is it okay that I have 1 million different topics, or do I need to make 1 million different streams? I think if you pick a person and uncover the topics that they're interested in. It gives you a little bit of room to talk about more than one thing. But if there's that commonality of this is who I'm speaking to, then great. If you want to talk about a million different things and those are literally a million different kinds of people that you could be serving, well then yes, because starting something general is very hard. Imagine that like you want to create a shoe company. Yes, you could create a shoe store that has running shoes, walking shoes, Crocs, casual shoes, fancy clubbing shoes, football cleats, like all this stuff. Or you can be the guy who creates the running shoe store, and anybody who walks into the store knows kind of what they're getting involved with already. They don't even need to know what you're about because they know that that's what the topic is at least, and that's what they're interested in. So already you're hooking people in on the topic that they're interested in. Secondly, they walk in, they know they're going to hear from somebody who knows what running is about, and they're likely going to have questions, and then you can just hone in on answering those questions. You can still talk about running your marathon, running a 5K, running ultra marathons, long distance, running slowly while injured to stay endurance-wise, different kinds of shoes. So you can talk about a lot of things, but within that specific thing only would make a lot of sense. Celine says, thank you, you're welcome. Nilafar says, do you think we can promote an architectural software with podcasts? It needs more visual. How can we solve the challenge? So stories. Podcasting is all about stories. A lot of people think that I was sitting on my leg the whole time and now it's asleep. The main thoughts that people have about podcasting is, it's audio only, so I should only be talking about things that don't have visuals involved. But some of the most successful podcasts are actually things that do have visuals involved. They're just not talking about go here or look at this. They're telling the stories in and around it. For example, photography, very visual, obviously. Video editing, very, very, very visual oriented, obviously. Well, you're going to go to the YouTube channel to find all the tutorials and things like that. But on the podcast, you're going to connect with some of the industry leaders. You're going to hear their origin story and how they edit videos for other people, how they work-life balance, how they stay productive, how they stay focused and mentally fit during this time, how they land new clients. A photographer, how do you manage a wedding? You can tell those stories. You can unpack a lot of the process without having the visual things in it. So I think you can do that. Network Chuck says, do you involve your kids in the business? I do, with however much they want to be involved. If the kids come in here and they're like, hey, can you show me stuff? I'm like, yes, absolutely. But I'm not going to force my kids to be an entrepreneur. They are sort of as a byproduct of me being their dad, learning about all of it anyway. And as far as involvement, I mean, there are tax advanced strategies that you can use. You can actually put your kids on payroll to shield some of the money that you would otherwise spend paying to the government, and having it sort of be, if it's, I think, under $15,000, don't quote me on that. I'm not a CPA. This is not financial advice. This is just for my own opinion. Disclaimer out of the way now. I believe there is a limit of untaxable money that you can then offer a minor or one of your own children to work in your own business, such that they are getting essentially a payroll, and it's otherwise you're just saving money and not sending it over to the government, which is really cool. So yeah. But yeah, they're involved. I mean, my son joined me on stage at Podcast Movement in front of 2,000 people. My son did a talk in front of 500 people at FlynnCon. My daughter came in for a panel. My wife was on a panel with me too at FlynnCon. Evolving with Etta says, are solo podcasts not successful? No, there's several, very many successful solo podcasts. It's just we see the interview thing over and over again. And I think because it's seemingly easier to imagine just asking questions and connecting with people, plus you get the connection too, versus the solo show, which is a lot harder. It's definitely harder to talk to a microphone by yourself. But when you can do it right, it's more authoritative. If you tell great stories, people are in your world now, and you don't always need to have other people in the show. I like to have a mix of both, but there is no one thing that's more successful than another. So, whew. Anyway, chat. Final question from Kathy here, since she is a mod here. Just got the AKG mic because I like the look of it and your recommendation. What is your favorite podcasting microphone? I like this one. This one's old school, but it's not easy to connect because you need all the other cables and stuff. It doesn't plug in via USB directly, but this is a beautiful microphone called the Heil PR40 has a very, very beautiful voice. I just have it out of my face right now, but I think that if I were to do this, would it come back in? Hopefully I don't unplug something I wasn't supposed to. But let's see if this works. Chat. Hey, chat. So this feels a little bit different, right? And the reason why I don't have this live with me is because, number one, it's in my face, and I'd much rather just kind of speak, and I use my hands a lot, as you can see. So I have a shotgun mic instead. But number two, this is my podcast voice, right? And it's still me, but it just has that broadcasty kind of tone, and I absolutely love this microphone. It's like a $400 microphone. But I kind of want to feel like we're just more having a conversation than just kind of sitting back and listening in. So anyway, it's a little different, but I love it. SM7B is one that is very popular as well. The ATR 2100. For many of you, I'm just shouting random numbers, but that's okay. Anyway, thank you all so much for today. I'm going to keep this mic on until the end here, but thank you so much for coming in. I appreciate you. We are just about at 100 likes, so before you leave, if you haven't done so already, hit that thumbs up button. Things do happen over 100, so I appreciate you for that. Episode 300 tomorrow, starting at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 or noon Eastern. We're going to enjoy our hour together. We're going to make it, I'm not extending that one because we're coming up to the 365-minute one on day 365, so really, really stoked on that. So, yeah. Anyway, thank you so much. I appreciate you. This sounds like Pat Bot. Haha, sorry for the bad joke. It's okay. Let me go back to the other one. Cool. It's a little bit, it's like, I think that because of where I have it plugged in now, there's a lot of like enhancements to it. So anyway, you're amazing. Thank you for today. I appreciate you. I did get the secret word in. Thank you for over 100 likes. I see it. I'll see you tomorrow for episode 300. Episode 300. How crazy is that? We'll see you then. Cheers, take care, and as always, Team Flynn for the win. You're a rock star.
This is the income stream to help you achieve your dream. All while we keep it clean. This is the income stream. It's the kind of show where you can come and go, but then you leave inspired with no fee required. The income stream with Pat Flynn.
Woo! $2.99 in the bag. Looking forward to tomorrow. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. And really, really looking forward to continuing all the way through to 365. So let's keep up the good work. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week. Peace out. See you soon.
Bruh.